Hello everybody, Michael with McEwen Gunstocks, finally back in the shop. It's been a cold winter. Shops have been running around 40 degrees, sometimes a little colder than that, and I just can't last more than a few minutes. But here today we're at 52 degrees. I'm in a sweater and working in the shop. I got the air compressor project finished. Before I moved to the shop 3.5 years ago, I had been given this old 1970s Campbell Hausfeld compressor, and it had been left outside. It was pretty bad shape. The compressor pump itself was all rusted out inside, so took it apart, did a resto on it, and just got the fan guard on. I had to drop in a 20 amp circuit breaker and an outlet for it, and got a hose reel that you see mounted on the wall, and I am ready to start using some air sanding and die grinding on the gun stocks. I'm really excited about that. Hopefully it'll make some of the work I do a little easier, or at least give me a little more flexibility and capability on some of the stuff I do. But here, let me just zoom in real quick there. Kind of wish I'd painted it while I was at it, but it's not in too bad a shape in its original 1970s form. And then a Harbor Freight hose reel and some wiring. All right, let me swing the camera around. And this is what we're really working on. And I kind of forget what action that is. You see what's happened to it. It looks like it's probably HW95. I'll verify that, but could be HW80, but I don't think so. It's been here for a few weeks. I'm really sorry, Mr. Customer, but it's just been too cold and too busy with work to get to it, but now I am, so here we are. And as I look at this, it's going to be pretty challenging, and I have a couple ideas on this. I've been thinking about it. Well, I haven't been able to work on it, but I've been giving it a lot of thought. This kind of failure is really common. I mean, it's otherwise a beautiful CNC cut stock. Got the stippling and color, and it looks really nice. But the grain is just as cheap as you can get, and it just goes straight through the wrist. And when the grain goes straight through the wrist, it doesn't take too much of an impact to cause this failure to happen. And I have long thought that when people get a gun with a stock like this, and specifically we're really talking about air guns here, that before it's even used, the wrist ought to be pinned, because it's probably going to break at some point anyway, and it'll have to be pinned then, and suffer the degradation of appearance by having the glue line. So I have kicked around an idea of making a drill guide that would be molded to fit in the inletting and have the right angle of the hole, so that somebody could then go and drill on through the wrist without too much fear of having the drill bit get sideways and come out the side, or not make it through properly. And so a lot of times when I've done repairs like this, I've drilled a hole on one side, drill a hole on the other side, and then use a burr and open them up until they fit together, because the two holes never are lined up perfectly. And then use thickened epoxy to glue it together. And I've done a lot of repairs that way, and it works okay. It especially works good with a walnut stock, not a stained whitewood stock, a walnut stock where we can do some sanding afterwards and just refinish the whole area or the whole gun stock. But in the case of one of these ammonia fumed, or however they do this finish over with white wood, we can't run the risk of having to do any work to the wood. Pretty much once we glue it together, we get what we're going to get. And additionally, the method of using epoxy is a little bit less than ideal, I think, because we use thin epoxy on the wood to get good absorption, and then where the steel rod goes through, we have to use thickened epoxy. Of course, when we put together, that thickened epoxy squishes out all over into this area that we use thin epoxy on anyway, so that's a little bit of a bummer. But additionally, the I guess it would be called peel strength of an epoxy wood joint, I just don't think is as good as an aliphatic resin, like a Titebond glue joint. A Titebond aliphatic resin glue joint is stronger than the wood. It won't break at that joint again. The wood will break first somewhere else. And with epoxy, I know it's not quite as strong. Now, all those repairs I've done, none of them ever re-broke again. I don't think it's an issue. But since here I'm trying to find a solution that will minimize the impact on the appearance of where the break is, and at the same time develop a technique that people can use to pin it before it happens. That's kind of the direction I want to go on this repair, is glue it together with aliphatic resin as best as it can be, and then I'm going to make a drill guide block, and we'll do that together. I have a couple ideas on how I'm going to do that, and we'll see what works best, and then drill through any epoxy glue in a steel pin. Excuse me, I'm still recovering from being really sick here a few weeks ago. I didn't do a COVID test, but it so significantly impacted my lungs. I wonder if I didn't have it, and I really wish I did a test, because I'd love to have had it and knew I had it to get it over with. But I kind of think it was. I was pretty sick, so excuse my voice and coughing and choking. So this has an additional little challenge, that the wood doesn't just neatly fit together. There is a sliver of wood that, I don't know if we can see this here. There's this piece of wood here that is a separate little, I'll try to get it in there. See, it's kind of separated there. And when wood breaks like this, I think, this is just my model that I think happens, some of the wood, as it gets pulled apart, stays in a slightly expanded state. So it doesn't really go back together quite perfectly. And one thing I've done in the past, especially with the epoxy kind of repair, where we pre-drill the holes, is remove wood from the middle where I think it's proud and keeping it from getting together. I don't want to do that this time, and as I've played with this, I can find ways that I can kind of slide the grain back together again. There, I kind of got it right there, where it looks pretty tight. So I think I'm just going to try to do a little slip and slide and clamp. So I've got a couple of squeeze clamps. I'm going to do some practicing on clamping with it dry. That can be really tricky, because it looks like I'll probably be able to get a clamp like this, but sometimes, like trying to go this way, it just slips off because it's at a weird angle, and sometimes we have to build it up with some wood blocks or maybe some tape to hold it in place. So I'm going to do a bunch of experiments before putting glue on it and make sure I have a plan on how I'm going to do the clamping. I'm going to use aliphatic resin glue, stick them together, clamp it, let it cure, then we'll make a drill guide, drill through and pin it, and hope for the best. So I will turn the camera on when things are interesting, but I probably got a half hour ahead of me of playing with the clamps and come up with a plan.